The morning Vivienne Aldercott clipped the motorbike. She was already 12 minutes behind a meeting she had restructured three people's careers to attend. The old bike sat at the edge of the Whitmore Road intersection. Its rider crouched beside it, in a flannel jacket worn thin at one elbow, and she felt the mirror of her Bentley catch its handlebars with a sound like a question she didn't want to answer. She stepped out because her lawyers had told her never not to. She did not yet know that the leather saddlebag beneath the bike's left panel contained a sealed envelope her father had hidden 9 years ago, the last thing he ever put in writing, and that the man now rising from his crouch, grease already on his knuckles, was the only person in the world who knew where it had been. He was already looking at the damage. He had not yet looked at her. His hands were on the handlebars, one thumb pressed to the crumpled housing above the left engine casing, and something about the way he stood there, not performing patience, just actually patient, made her jaw tighten in a way she didn't have language for. She pulled her coat closed. The autumn wind off the valley smelled like iron. She was already composing the sentence she would say. She said it. He turned, and the last thing Vivienne Aldercott saw before the world rearranged itself was a saddlebag she had almost destroyed, buckled shut, one strap dark with old road oil, and the name stamped into the leather in block letters that stopped her mid-breath on the shoulder of a country road on a Tuesday morning in November. The name was her father's. Marcus Hale's workshop sat at the back of his property on 3 acres outside Dunmore, and the morning that would undo and remake everything began, as every morning did, with the sound of his daughter trying to beat him to the coffee. He heard her bare feet on the oak boards before she cleared the kitchen doorway. She hadn't put her socks on again. Floor was cold. Boiler had run low, and she appeared in the doorway with her hair matted on one side and her brass compass already in her hand. Her name was Rosie. She was 8 years old. She had a way of tilting her head when she looked at you, slightly left, as though she were triangulating the distance between what you said and what you meant, and Marcus had privately decided it was the most terrifying thing he had ever loved. The compass had been her mother's. It was a 1943 British military issue, the brass worn to near silver on one edge from Elena's habit of rubbing the same spot when she was thinking. And Rosie had inherited the habit without ever knowing its origin. Marcus had told her once that the compass always pointed north, and she had nodded as though this was not the point. "I know," she had said. "But Dad, north is wherever you need it to be." He hadn't corrected her. It felt more right than whatever the instrument said. He poured her a mug of warm milk and set it on the counter without her asking. She climbed onto the stool and watched him pull on his jacket. The workshop behind the house held 2 motorcycles mid-restoration, a Triumph Tiger dating to 1969 that a collector in Osaka had been waiting on for 4 months, a set of Senate-grade period chairs commissioned by a Vermont Historical Society, and a clipboard by the door listing, in Marcus's compressed handwriting. 7 client names across 4 countries. He didn't talk about the clients. But the clipboard was visible from the driveway to anyone who stopped and looked, and the names on it were the kind that made a particular type of person go very quiet. The ticking clock was the 3rd item on the clipboard, written in red, 15 days, £48,000. That was what Rosie's school owed on a lease renewal for the community arts facility it rented from the Aldercott Property Group. If the check did not clear, the school lost the building that held its music room and the ceramic studio where Rosie had, 3 weeks ago, made a small lopsided bowl she'd presented to Marcus, with the gravity of a peace offering between nations. He had put it on the windowsill above his workbench. It caught the morning light and made a small orange moon. He had been trying for 4 months to reach someone at Aldercott Property with authority to negotiate. Every letter landed in an assistant's inbox. Every call came back from someone one tier lower than the last. He kissed Rosie on the top of her head. He told her Mrs. Pollen next door had a key. He took the Triumph, his personal one, a 1982 Bonneville rebuilt from a rusted carcass, and rode north toward Whitmore Road, where the morning was clear and the road was dry, and he had 11 days of leverage left that he didn't yet know how to use. In the city, 40 miles south, Vivienne Aldercott had been awake since 4:15. She had restructured a division by 6:45, dismissed 2 department heads by 8, and signed a lease extension on 37 properties without reading the individual files, which was what she paid lawyers for. Which was the reason she did not know that among the 37 was a small community arts building in Dunmore, attached to a school she had never heard of. The application had been submitted by a man named Marcus Hale 11 days ago. She was in the Bentley by 9. At 10 o'clock in Whitmore Village cleared all morning 4, and she was doing 80 when the corner came faster than the map suggested. Her hidden wound was not her father's death 4 years ago, though that was part of it. It was the letter he had never sent. The lawyers had found drafts, correspondence, indications. James Aldercott had been preparing something handwritten in his last months. Something entirely separate from the official estate and the 40-page will her solicitor had walked her through while she took notes, because there was nothing else to do with grief except organize it. The document had never served. The one person he had trusted with it, according to a single line in a draft she'd found, was a man whose identity she had never been able to confirm. She was doing 80 when the corner came. She brought the Bentley down hard, felt the mirror clip something metal, heard it, and pulled over. She stepped out. The morning was cold. The man beside the motorbike had not looked up yet. She had a sentence prepared about insurance and liability and her assistant, who handled this kind of thing. He turned, and she lost the sentence completely. He assessed the damage before he assessed anything else. That was what she noticed first. Not the way he looked at her, but the way he didn't, at least not immediately. The way his attention was still on the bike, his thumb pressed to the crumpled mirror housing, with the same practiced steadiness she had seen engineers use on load-bearing structures. And she felt, absurdly, that she had been categorized and set aside for later. He was, she noted while composing herself, somewhere in his early 40s. His hands were a craftsman's hands, calloused across the palm, stained with something that was not quite grease and not quite paint. A composite residue she couldn't name. His truck, no, his motorbike, a Bonneville. She recognized the tank shape from a restoration she'd once briefly funded, was 1982 at the latest, the chrome foxed to a warm gold, the leather panniers original, and beneath the left pannier the saddlebag she had not yet looked at properly. His flannel was worn through at the right elbow. His boots were steel-capped and waterproofed, the real kind, not the fashion kind. She filed this away in the way she filed everything: category, value, likely position. The category she assigned was serviceable. The value she assigned was low. She was already wrong, and she didn't know it yet. He said, "The mirror housing is the main damage. Frame's intact. I'll need to true the handlebars before I ride it." He said this to the motorbike, not to her. She said, "I can have someone cover the costs. My assistant handles this sort of Route 12 northbound." He was still looking at the bike. 11 miles past the Linden Hollow junction. "Your offside mirror caught my pannier at approximately 9:14. He looked at her then, just briefly, and she understood from the look that he was not compiling the information for a dispute. He was simply making sure the facts existed in the open air between them. "It's all right. It's a country road." I was going too fast, she said, which was true, and which she had not planned to say. He crouched beside the wheel and pressed 2 fingers just below the axle housing. He went still for 3 seconds, head slightly tilted, eyes not quite focused on anything visible. And then he straightened. His expression had changed by something too small to name. Left front axle housing has a small fracture. It's been there a while, stress crack, not today's damage. Another 200 miles, maybe 250, and you'd have had a full separation at speed. He said this the way he had said everything else, as information. Not a warning, not an attempt to impress. She had the sensation of stepping off a curb she hadn't seen. How could you possibly know that she stopped? She had not decided to ask the question. He looked at her for a moment. Touch and sound, he said. The vibration pattern's different over a fracture. You feel it before you hear it, but if you know what you're listening for. He paused. It's actually more accurate than visual inspection in a lot of cases. She was still processing the gap between what she had assumed and what he had just demonstrated. Something in the assumption had made a sound like a structure settling. He was already moving toward the saddlebag. I have tools in here, he said, if you want the mirror assessed properly. You're driving that car with one side mirror until you reach a garage. She wanted him to leave. She needed to be 12 minutes ago and 40 miles south. She had a board member waiting in a village restaurant who had flown in from Zurich specifically for this morning. He had a technical reason to stay, and she had no argument against it that didn't make her the person who had clipped someone's motorbike and driven away. Fine, she said. He opened the saddlebag. She looked away, then, involuntarily, back. Her eyes found the stamped leather of a small interior pouch, half visible beneath the tool roll, and the name pressed into it in block letters, and the world made a sound it had never made before. James Aldercott. She said nothing. Her throat had closed. He had the tool roll open, and hadn't looked at her face, and couldn't know that everything had changed. Her unanswered question hung in the cold morning air. Unasked. She managed. She had been managing since she was 26, and her father had handed her the chairman's seat with a look she had spent 4 years trying to decode. She stood at the shoulder of Whitmore Road, with her hands in her coat pockets and her face correct, and watched Marcus Hale assess the Bentley's mirror with the same wordless precision he'd used on everything else. And she did not ask about the saddlebag, and she did not mention the name, and she was almost succeeding when the sound came from inside the motorbike's pannier. A small voice, half awake. The specific vocal register of a child who had been sleeping and was now deciding whether to continue. Dad, are we stopped? He moved to the pannier immediately, which was when she realized the passenger configuration, a small platform fitted behind the main seat, a safety harness, a blanket that had come loose. The child was perhaps 8, her hair matted on one side, a brass object clutched in one hand that caught the autumn light. We're stopped, he said quietly. Go back to sleep. The child sat up and looked at Vivienne with the calm, assessing gaze of someone who has been woken in strange places before and finds it more interesting than alarming. Dad says you can tell a lot about a person by what they do when they're lost, the child said. Her voice was entirely matter-of-fact. Are you lost? Vivienne said. No. I know exactly where I'm going. The child considered this with her head tilted slightly left. Okay, she said. But you stopped. She said it without any accusation. She said it the way you state a coordinate. And Vivienne, who had not been genuinely uncertain about her direction in 11 years, felt something in her chest go briefly sideways. Marcus did not prompt his daughter. He did not give Vivienne social cover. He was looking at the mirror housing again, and the side of his face was entirely neutral. And Vivienne understood, without being told, that she was being shown something he didn't show people by choice. The child climbed down from her perch with the confidence of someone who has done this many times and walked to her father's side. She was holding the compass in her left hand, rubbing the worn edge of it with her thumb, the exact same spot worn to near silver. And the gesture was so clearly inherited. So clearly someone else's habit lived in this child's body, that Vivienne felt the specific pain of recognizing absence in a present thing. The child looked up at her. "Your mirror's scratched," she said. "Yes, Dad can fix that." He fixed one for the woman at the post office. "I have people who handle that sort of thing," Vivienne said, too quickly, in the wrong register entirely, the boardroom voice, the distance voice, and immediately felt it land wrong. The child nodded as though this was an entirely sensible answer. "That's good," she said seriously. "It's good to have people." Vivienne opened her mouth and closed it. Marcus was still looking at the mirror. The corner of his mouth had moved by 1 millimeter, which she suspected was significant in his economy of expression. She didn't know what to say that wasn't wrong. And the child, apparently satisfied, leaned against her father's arm and watched the road. And the silence was the most comfortable silence Vivienne had stood in for years, which made no sense and which she could not explain to herself. "The mirror's cosmetic," Marcus said. "The mechanism's intact. You can drive it." "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He was moving back toward the motorbike. The child moved with him, companionable, unhurried, the saddlebag, Vivienne said. The words arrived before she decided on them. He turned. The name on it. The inner pocket. She kept her voice level. It was the one thing she was good at in any weather. "Where did you get it?" He looked at her for a long moment. The child was watching the horizon, rubbing the compass. "I'll be at this address this afternoon," he said, and gave her a card, plain stock, no logo. Just a name and a Dunmore road number, if you want to ask the question properly. She took the card. He righted the motorbike. The child climbed back up. They left, and Vivienne stood on the shoulder of Whitmore Road in the autumn cold, holding a business card in one hand and the image of a stamped name in the other, tilted off an axis she could not name and could not ignore. She did not go to the Zurich meeting. She sent her deputy with a one-sentence brief and spent 40 minutes in the lay-by with the Bentley's engine ticking down. Then she went to Dunmore. The stone farmhouse sat on 3 acres, and the workshop behind it was visible from the gate. 2 bikes, a workbench, the clipboard, the smell of beeswax and raw oak reaching her when she stepped out of the car. She found him at the bench, reassembling the pannier fitting. He heard her on the gravel and did not stop working. She was composing the right framing, professional, controlled, when the side gate opened and her deputy director of estates walked through it. She stopped. He walked quickly, suit jacket over his arm, with the particular hurried composure of someone who has been told about an unexpected complication. His name was Reginald Pell. He had been with the Aldercott Group for 11 years. He had glossy shoes, a habit of straightening his shirt cuffs twice before speaking, and he arrived already mid-sentence, as though the conversation had started in the car and she had only just been included in it. "Couldn't imagine you'd be here, Vivienne, so we'll sort this quickly," he said. And he addressed the air slightly above her shoulder, which was his habit, and then he noticed Marcus at the bench, and his eyes moved to him and stayed. He picked up a small wrench from the bench without asking. He turned it in his hand. Is this the sort of help you've been dealing with on the Dunmore situation? He said to Vivienne, and the contempt was in the framing, not the words, which meant he could always deny it later. Set the wrench down, Marcus said. He had not looked up from the pannier fitting. Pell smiled. He set the wrench down with the ease of someone who finds the request amusing. I've been trying to reach someone at Aldecott property about the school lease, Marcus said. His voice was the same register it had been on the road, factual, completely unhurried. £48,000, 15 days. I sent the application 11 days ago. These things take time, Pell said. The portfolio is extensive. The Cayman account opened under your mother's maiden name received 4 transfers between March and October of this year, Marcus said. He said it the way you report a temperature reading. Pell went still. The authorization codes on each transfer correspond to the access protocol you used on the Hensworth development, a document that your compliance office considers sealed. The wrench was between them on the bench. Pell had not touched it again. The Financial Conduct Authority has a standing interest in secondary authorization patterns in dormant estate accounts. Marcus set the pannier fitting down and looked at Pell directly for the first time. The Hensworth file reference is 004GS1109. That's the one they'll pull first. A silence. The kind that is not peaceful. You should go, Marcus said. He picked up the next fitting. I don't think this is a conversation you want to continue. Pell's hands were at his sides. He did not straighten his cuffs. He looked once at Vivienne, the look of a man calculating distance, and then he was walking, and then he was at the gate, and then the gate was closed, and the sound of his car starting and pulling away was the sound of air leaving something that had been full. Marcus returned to the fitting. Vivienne could not speak for the duration of a full minute. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she was not usually aware of it. When she found her voice, it came out different. Who are you? He set the fitting down. He wiped his hands on a cloth. He said, Come with me. There's something you should see first. She followed him in the Bentley, 3 miles north, onto a road she didn't recognize, to a site she would have dismissed as abandoned construction if he had not pulled over and gotten out and walked toward it with the bearing of someone approaching a place that still has teeth. The site had been a residential development, 15 years ago at least. Foundation poured, frames raised, then stopped. The frames had weathered to gray. The signage was gone, but the ghost of letters on the perimeter hoarding was still readable, and she knew that corporate mark from her father's study. My wife's name was Alina Hale, Marcus said. She was a structural engineer, contracted to this development through Aldecott Construction, 14 years ago. He was looking at the concrete, not at her. She filed a structural assessment in March of that year, a deviation in the aggregate mix in sections C and D, documented, measurable. She put the risk in writing and sent it up the chain. The wind moved through the open frames. The report was suppressed. The revised sign-off was submitted under a different engineer's credential. Alina found out in June. He paused. She went back to the site on her own in July to document it again. There was an access failure on the eastern scaffolding. Unlogged, there was no one else there. Vivienne understood what he wasn't saying. She had understood it since the second sentence, but she waited. The inquest found accidental death. The suppressed report was never entered into evidence. I found a copy 8 months later in her files. Spent 3 years trying to find someone with standing to receive it. Your father, James Aldecott, was the first person in the company who read it without dismissing it. She looked at the foundation outline in the November light. He was preparing a formal acknowledgement in his last year, what had been suppressed, and by whom, and a trust structure that would have settled the harm. He put the materials in the saddlebag and asked me to keep them safe. He looked at her. He said he'd come back for them. He did not finish. He didn't need to. Vivienne had the sensation of a building shifting on its foundations, not collapsing, just moving. The way things move when the ground is no longer what it was. Her company had buried a woman's report. Her father had known and had spent his last year trying to excavate it. The chain from Elena Hale to this site to that saddlebag to a country road on a Tuesday morning was so long and so direct that she felt it like a rope around her wrist. She had not done this, but the company bearing her name had. And her father had left the evidence with the only man he trusted, and had died before he could come back for it. "He wrote you a letter," Marcus said. "It's in the saddlebag. I've never opened it." She had no words. She had run out of armor several minutes ago, and hadn't noticed the moment it went. The next 12 days arrived with the speed of things that have been prepared for a long time. She moved the board meeting forward. She retained an independent oversight council and put 3 senior managers on paid suspension before she had finished reading the suppressed report in full. She had her governance director submit Elena's original assessment to the Solicitor's Regulation Authority with a full chain of custody record. The FCA received the Cayman account documentation from her compliance team before Pell's lawyers finished preparing a response to the inquiry she had already opened. Pell was in a conference room on the 11th day when the SRA representative and 2 FCA investigators arrived at the company's London office. He had been told the meeting was internal. The door shut. She watched through the glass as the realization moved through him. She saw it in his hands first, then in the stillness where his cuff-straightening habit had been, and then in the way his face simply ran out of options, one by one, like lights going off in a building at closing time. He sat. He did not speak for a long time. The board's unanimous resolution followed that afternoon. The Aldecott property lease on the Dunmore Community Arts Facility was extended for 10 years at the existing rate. The £48,000 was cleared at 4:15, 11 minutes before the close of business, and the foreclosure process that had been gathering in the background was stopped where it stood. The trust structure her father had outlined in his letter, the James Aldecott Foundation, named in his own handwriting, was submitted for legal establishment by the end of the week. Pell left the building at 6:37, escorted. He did not look at the windows. He did not compose a parting remark for anyone. He walked to the waiting vehicle the way a man walks when he is no longer performing, which is to say without purpose, which is to say the way air leaves a room when the last door closes. She turned from the window and found Marcus standing at the edge of the conference room, having arrived quietly, in the way he arrived everywhere, and she looked at his face, and what she saw there was not triumph. It was the face of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has only now, in this moment, been able to set it down. She had no sentence for it. She didn't try to find one. 1 year later, Rosie Hale was in the ceramic studio at the Community Arts Facility on a Saturday morning, making a second bowl. This one was not lopsided. She was explaining to the 12-year-old beside her that the trick was to think about the center and let your hands follow, which was advice she had heard her father give about motorbikes and which translated, as it turned out, to most things. The compass was in her jacket pocket. It always was. Marcus's workshop had 3 new bays now. The Senate chairs had been delivered and praised in a letter that he had put in a folder, and not mentioned to anyone. The Osaka collector had received the triumph and sent a response that ran to 4 pages, and that Marcus had read twice and set aside in the same folder. The clipboard by the door had 6 names on it, and the red ink was gone. The foreclosure notice that had been on the community board in the school hallway for 11 days had been replaced, on the day it was lifted, by a drawing Rosie had made in ceramics class of a bowl with a small orange moon in it. He had driven to the city 3 times in the past year on reasons that were not purely professional. Each time he had arrived in the afternoon and left in the evening and told Rosie nothing except that he was visiting a friend. She had accepted this with the same triangulating look and said nothing, which was how he knew she had decided it was fine. On the 4th visit, Vivienne opened the door before he reached it, which meant she had heard the bike from inside, which meant she had been listening for it. He came in. She put the kettle on. The kitchen had curtains now, blue linen, open. The light coming through in the late afternoon way that makes everything look like something worth keeping. There was a pot on the stove she had put there herself. There were boots by the door that were not her size. They were sitting at the table when his hand rested near hers on the wood surface. Neither of them moved it. The kitchen was warm. The compass, wherever Rosie had put it last, was pointing home. Some things spend years in the dark, sealed up in good leather by someone who believed the right person would come along eventually. And they do. They always do. And when they do, what they find is not what they expected, which is the only way any of it works. If you've been carrying this story for the last 33 minutes, share it with someone who needed to hear that the things left behind by people we've lost don't disappear. They wait. Subscribe if these are the kinds of stories you come back for, and tell me this in the comments. If you discovered that something your family built had buried the truth that destroyed someone else's life, would you open the envelope, knowing you couldn't close it again? We read every one.